Have you ever been the person everyone calls when they need something, but somehow you're still not doing enough? Well, let me tell you about the day I decided to send my family an itemized invoice for every single favor I'd ever done for them. And trust me, what happened next changed everything. I'm sitting here now, months after that decision, and I can still feel my hands shaking as I typed out that first line item on the spreadsheet. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this all started, to that suffocating Sunday dinner where my entire world turned upside down. You know those family gatherings where the air feels thick with unspoken expectations? That was every Sunday at my parents' house. I'd arrive early, as always, helping Mom set the table while my siblings would stroll in fashionably late, and nobody would bat an eye. That particular Sunday, though, something was different. There was this tension I could feel crackling under the surface of every conversation, every forced smile. My sister Rachel had just announced her engagement 3 weeks prior, and the wedding planning had consumed every family interaction since then. I'd already spent countless hours helping her research venues, compare catering options, and even drove 6 hours round trip to look at a dress she ended up not even buying. But that Sunday, as we sat around the table picking at Mom's pot roast, my brother Marcus cleared his throat in that way he does when he's about to say something he thinks is important. He looked at me with this expression that I now recognize as a mixture of entitlement and judgment, and he said, "You know, we've been talking, and we think you should contribute more to the family." I literally felt my fork freeze halfway to my mouth. Contribute more? The words echoed in my head like a bad joke. My father nodded in agreement, and my mother had this apologetic look on her face, but she wasn't disagreeing. Rachel chimed in, saying that with the wedding coming up, everyone needed to step up, and that she'd noticed I hadn't offered to help pay for any of the major expenses. I sat there, completely stunned, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. For 32 years, I had been the family's unofficial emergency contact, the one who dropped everything when someone needed help, the person who never said no. And now they were telling me I wasn't contributing enough? I felt something crack inside me in that moment. Not a dramatic break, but a subtle fracture in the foundation of who I thought I was in this family. I remember setting down my fork very carefully, taking a deep breath, and asking them what exactly they meant by contribute more. The answers that followed felt like a cascade of tiny knives. They wanted me to help pay for Rachel's wedding venue, to take on more of the responsibility for Mom and Dad's house repairs, to be more present for family events, even though I'd never missed a single one. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. Here I was, the person who had sacrificed countless weekends, vacation days, and personal plans for this family, being told I wasn't doing enough. My throat felt tight, and I could feel tears threatening to spill, but I held them back. I wasn't going to cry, not this time. Instead, I heard myself saying, "Okay, I'll think about it," in this voice that didn't even sound like mine. The dinner continued, but I was somewhere else entirely, my mind racing through years of memories, each one now tainted with this new perspective. As I drove home that night, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white, something shifted inside me. The hurt began transforming into something else, something sharper and more purposeful. If they wanted to talk about contributions, then maybe it was time they understood exactly how much I'd been contributing all along. That's when the idea first sparked in my mind, crazy and radical and absolutely necessary. What if I actually showed them? What if I documented every single thing I'd done for this family and gave them a real, tangible invoice? The thought made my heart race with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Could I actually do this? Should I? But the more I thought about it, driving through the dark streets toward my empty apartment, the more it felt like the only thing that made sense. They wanted to quantify contribution? Fine. I'd give them numbers they couldn't ignore. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years, but also with this gnawing doubt eating at the edges of my determination. Was I being petty? Was I overreacting? I made my coffee and sat at my kitchen table, staring at my laptop screen, cursor blinking in an empty spreadsheet. For a solid 20 minutes, I just sat there, questioning everything. But then I remembered Marcus's face, that casual dismissiveness when he said I should contribute more, and my fingers started moving across the keyboard. I decided to start with the most recent year, figuring if I went back too far, I'd lose myself in the enormity of it all. Just 12 months. Surely I could document 12 months. The first entry was easy because it was so fresh. March 15th. Drove 6 hours round trip to help Rachel look at wedding dress, took day off work, paid for gas and lunch. I sat back and stared at that line. How much was that worth? I started researching what professional wedding planners charged per hour, what a personal shopper would cost, the value of a vacation day from my job. The numbers started adding up quickly, but it wasn't just about money. How do you price the emotional labor of listening to someone complain about dress styles for 4 hours straight? How do you quantify the exhaustion of being perpetually available? I created columns: date, service provided, time invested, monetary value, emotional labor rating. That last column felt important, even if it couldn't be converted to dollars and cents. As I scrolled back through my calendar and text messages, each entry triggered a flood of memories. February 23rd, spent entire weekend helping Mom clean out the garage because Dad's back was hurting, and my siblings were too busy. I remembered the dust, the old boxes, the way my mother kept apologizing for asking, but not enough to actually tell me I could leave. I documented it all. The professional organizer rate, the hauling service we didn't hire because I did it instead, the cost of the supplies I bought with my own money. January 10th, drove Marcus to the airport at 4 in the morning because he didn't want to pay for parking. The entry seemed small, almost petty to include, but then I remembered he'd asked me to pick him up too, 2 weeks later, also at an ungodly hour. And neither time did he offer gas money or even a genuine thank you. It went on the list. As the spreadsheet grew, something strange started happening. I began remembering things I'd completely forgotten, favors so normalized in our family dynamic that they'd become invisible even to me. The time I'd spent 3 evenings helping my father figure out his new smartphone, essentially becoming his personal tech support. The countless Sunday dinners where I arrived early to help cook and stayed late to clean, while my siblings enjoyed the meal and left. The birthday presents I'd put thought and money into while receiving gift cards in return, if anything at all. Every time I babysat Rachel's kids with 2 hours' notice so she could have a much-needed break. Every time I'd listen to Marcus complain about his job for hours on end, offering advice and support he never took. Every time I'd mediated arguments between family members, playing therapist without any training or appreciation. The documentation process took me 3 full days, working late into each night, and what emerged was staggering even to me. I sat back and looked at the spreadsheet, now spanning dozens of rows, and felt this weird mixture of validation and sadness wash over me. The monetary value alone, calculated conservatively using market rates for equivalent services, came to over $47,000 for just 1 year. $47,000. I said the number out loud in my empty apartment, and it sounded absurd, but every single line item was documented, time-stamped, and completely true. But the numbers were only part of the story, and I knew it. In a separate document, I started writing descriptions of the emotional cost, the invisible labor that couldn't be captured in a dollar amount, the anxiety I felt every time my phone rang, wondering which family member needed something this time, the guilt I carried whenever I tried to say no, which was so rare it made saying yes feel like my only option, the way I'd canceled dates, missed opportunities with friends, and put my own life on hold because family came first. Always. Without question. I wrote about the time I'd been sick with the flu, but still showed up to help with Thanksgiving dinner because everyone contributes. I wrote about missing my best friend's bachelorette party because Rachel needed help addressing wedding invitations, something she could have easily done herself or hired someone to do. I wrote about the vacation I'd been planning for months that I canceled because Dad needed surgery and someone had to be there to drive him to follow-up appointments, even though Marcus lived closer and had a more flexible schedule. Every memory I documented felt like picking at a scab, painful but necessary. I realized I'd been building resentment for years without acknowledging it, filing away each instance of being taken for granted in some mental cabinet I refused to open. Now it was all laid out in front of me, undeniable and overwhelming. My apartment felt too quiet as I worked, just the sound of my keyboard clicking and occasionally my own sharp intake of breath as I remembered something else to add. I included the time I'd lent Marcus $2,000 that he still hadn't paid back, promising it was just until his next paycheck, which was now 9 months ago. I included every grocery run I'd done for my parents, every prescription I'd picked up, every errand I'd run because it was on my way, even when it wasn't. I documented the emotional support calls, the middle-of-the-night texts I'd responded to, the crisis management I'd provided. There was the time Rachel called me sobbing at 2 in the morning because she'd had a fight with her fiancé, and I stayed on the phone with her for 3 hours, then showed up at her house the next morning with coffee and breakfast, despite having an important work presentation at noon that I was exhausted for. I remembered my boss's disappointed face when I stumbled through that presentation, and how I couldn't explain that I'd been up all night playing therapist to my sister because that would sound like an excuse. On the spreadsheet, that entry read, crisis counseling, 3 hours phone, 2 hours in person, materials provided, opportunity cost of poor work performance, the professional rate for a therapist, the cost of the breakfast I'd bought, the potential impact on my career advancement. It all went down in black and white. By the third day, I had created something that felt almost like a legal document, meticulously detailed and impossible to dismiss. But I wasn't done yet. I spent another full day crafting the invoice itself, giving it a professional letterhead, itemizing everything by category: transportation services, event planning assistance, childcare, emotional labor and counseling, technical support, financial loans, household management, personal shopping and errands, emergency services, holiday and event coordination. Under each category, the line items told their own story. Under childcare, there were 34 separate occasions in 1 year where I'd watched Rachel's kids, ranging from 2 hours to overnight stays. I calculated using the local going rate for babysitters, which felt almost laughably inadequate for what I'd actually provided, but I kept the numbers conservative because I wanted this to be bulletproof. Under event planning assistance, the wedding-related tasks alone spanned 2 full pages: venue research, vendor comparisons, the dress shopping expedition, multiple cake tastings, flower consultations, invitation assembly, rehearsal dinner planning, and that didn't even include the emotional support of listening to Rachel's endless anxieties and changing opinions. A professional wedding planner would have charged thousands just for the hours I'd logged, never mind the expertise I'd had to research and acquire on the fly. Under emergency services, I listed every last-minute crisis I'd responded to, from Marcus's car breaking down at midnight 40 miles away, to Mom flooding the kitchen and needing immediate help because Dad was out of town. Each instance included my response time, services provided, and the value of having someone available 24/7, which I calculated using emergency service rates, because that's essentially what I'd been providing. The financial loans section was shorter, but significant, totaling almost $4,000 lent to various family members over the year. Most of it never repaid or even acknowledged after the initial ask. I included a standard interest rate calculation, just to see what it would look like, and watched the numbers climb even higher. As I formatted the document, making it look official and professional, I felt this strange sense of detachment, like I was creating evidence for a court case against people I loved. Because I did love them, that was the complicated part. This wasn't about not loving my family. It was about them not valuing me, not seeing me, treating my time and energy as infinite resources they could tap into without consequence. The invoice now ran 14 pages, single-spaced, with a summary page at the front showing the grand total, $47,392 for documented services rendered over 12 months. Below that, I added a note. This invoice represents 1 year of contribution to family needs, calculated using conservative market rates for equivalent professional services. It does not include the 20-plus years of similar contribution prior to this documentation period, nor does it adequately capture the emotional cost and opportunity losses associated with this level of availability and service. My hand hovered over the keyboard as I considered adding more, maybe softening it somehow, but no. This was already softer than it deserved to be. I was charging them less than market rate for most services and not even attempting to bill for the emotional devastation of being told I didn't contribute enough. I saved the document with the file name Family Contribution Invoice 2024 PDF and stared at it sitting in my downloads folder. Creating it had been cathartic, empowering even, but actually sending it was something else entirely. For 2 days, that PDF sat on my desktop and I'd open it, read through it, close it, and walk away. I'd pick up my phone to start an email, then put it down. I'd rehearse what I might say in an accompanying message, then talk myself out of the whole thing. What was I trying to accomplish? Did I actually want them to pay me? Was this just revenge? Would this destroy my family relationships permanently? The questions spiraled through my mind, and I lost sleep wrestling with them. I confided in my best friend Jessica, the same friend whose bachelorette party I'd missed. I sent her the invoice, half expecting her to tell me I was being ridiculous. Instead, she called me immediately, and the first thing she said was, "Holy shit, this is just 1 year?" Her reaction was validating and terrifying in equal measure. She told me she'd watched me disappear into my family's demands for years, watched me cancel plans and show up exhausted and never prioritize myself. "Send it," she said firmly. "Even if they never pay you a dime, they need to see this. You need them to see this." But it was my therapist's response during my next session that finally solidified my decision. I'd started seeing Dr. Chen a few months earlier for what I'd described as general anxiety, though we'd quickly identified that most of my anxiety stemmed from family dynamics and my inability to set boundaries. When I showed her the invoice, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that hit me like a freight train. "This document is your boundary. You've spent your whole life showing your family through actions that you're available and willing. You've never shown them the cost. How can they respect a boundary they don't even know exists?" She was right. I'd been operating under the assumption that my family should just know, should just recognize what I was doing and appreciate it. But I'd never actually communicated the weight of it, never pushed back, never asked for anything in return. I'd made myself the path of least resistance, and now I was angry that they kept taking that path. The invoice wasn't about getting paid, though some petty part of me wouldn't have minded that. It was about making visible what had always been invisible, about forcing a conversation that should have happened years ago. On a Saturday morning, exactly 1 week after creating the invoice, I woke up and decided today was the day. No more overthinking, no more second-guessing. I made coffee, sat at my laptop, and opened my email. The accompanying message needed to be carefully worded, not aggressive, but not apologetic either. I wrote and deleted probably 15 drafts before settling on this. "Dear family, after our conversation at Sunday dinner regarding my need to contribute more to the family, I've taken time to reflect on my contributions over the past year. I've attached a detailed invoice documenting my services, time, and financial investments. I've used conservative market rates for equivalent professional services to calculate the monetary value. While I don't expect payment, I believe this documentation provides important context for our conversation about contribution. I'm open to discussing this further at your convenience. With love." I attached the PDF, typed each of their email addresses into the recipient field with shaking hands, and before I could talk myself out of it one more time, I hit send. The moment the email whooshed out of my outbox, I felt like I might throw up. I closed my laptop, stood up too fast, and had to sit back down because the room was spinning. What had I just done? I'd just sent my family an invoice for being their daughter, their sister, their on-call support system. For the next hour, I couldn't sit still. I paced my apartment, checked my phone obsessively, opened my laptop to see if anyone had read the email yet, closed it again, tried to distract myself with TV, with music, with anything that would stop the anxiety spiraling through my chest. The first response came 3 hours later, and it was from Rachel. Just seeing her name in my inbox made my heart jump. The email was short. "Is this a joke?" 3 words that somehow managed to be both dismissive and hurt at the same time. I stared at those 3 words and felt my resolve strengthen rather than weaken. I wrote back, "No, it's documentation. Read through it." Then Marcus replied, and his email was longer, angrier. "I can't believe you would do something so petty and manipulative. Families help each other, they don't keep score like this. This is incredibly hurtful and honestly makes me question what kind of person you've become." I read his email 3 times, and each time I got angrier. Petty? Manipulative? I'd documented facts, actual things that happened, actual services I'd provided, and families help each other? That was rich coming from someone who'd borrowed $2,000 and acted like I was the unreasonable one for mentioning it. I didn't respond to Marcus immediately because I knew anything I wrote in that moment would be pure rage. Instead, I waited. My father's email arrived that evening, and it was the most measured of the 3. "Sweetheart, I think we need to talk about this in person. Your mother and I are concerned about these feelings you're having. We love you and we're sorry if we made you feel unappreciated, but this invoice feels like a step too far. Can we please have a family meeting to discuss this calmly?" At least he was acknowledging feelings, even if he was pathologizing them as something I was having rather than something they'd caused. My mother called instead of emailing. I let it go to voicemail the first time, needing to prepare myself. Her message was tearful. "Honey, please call me back. I don't understand why you're so upset. We've always been such a close family. Your father and I are heartbroken that you feel this way. Please, let's talk about this." The guilt hit me like a wave. That was my mother's superpower, making me feel guilty for having feelings that inconvenienced her. But I reminded myself of why I'd sent the invoice in the first place, of that Sunday dinner and the casual cruelty of being told I wasn't doing enough. Over the next 24 hours, the messages intensified. Group texts started flying, with me conspicuously left off the thread, but hearing about them through individual messages. Rachel sent a long email listing all the things she'd done for me over the years, as if this was a competition and she needed to defend herself. Marcus called me selfish and said I was ruining Rachel's wedding experience with my drama. My father tried the reasonable approach, suggesting family therapy, which would have been great about 10 years ago, but felt too little too late now. What nobody was doing, I noticed, was actually addressing the invoice itself. Nobody was disputing any of the line items, questioning the accuracy of my documentation, or acknowledging the sheer volume of what I'd done. They were too busy being offended by the format to look at the content. That's when I realized I needed to force the conversation I actually wanted to have. I sent a group email to all of them. I noticed that everyone is upset about receiving an invoice, but nobody has actually addressed what's documented in it. Can any of you tell me which line items are inaccurate? Which services did I not actually provide? Which dates are wrong? Because from where I'm sitting, your anger isn't about the facts, it's about being confronted with them. The silence that followed was deafening. For 2 days, nothing. Then my father called and asked me to come to Sunday dinner, that the whole family wanted to talk. I almost said no. The thought of sitting around that same table, being made to feel guilty for standing up for myself, made me feel sick. But Jessica convinced me to go, to see this through. They've had time to actually look at what you sent, she said. Maybe they've had time to think. I doubted it, but I agreed to go. That Sunday, I arrived exactly on time, not early like I always had. I didn't help Mom set the table. I sat in the living room and waited while everyone else prepared dinner, and the discomfort in the house was palpable. When we finally sat down to eat, nobody knew how to start the conversation. We passed dishes in awkward silence until finally, my father cleared his throat. "We've all reviewed your document," he said carefully, "and we want you to know that we hear you. We didn't realize you were feeling so burdened by helping the family." I felt my jaw clench. Feeling burdened wasn't what I'd documented. I'd documented actual labor, actual time, actual costs. But I stayed quiet, waiting to see where this was going. My mother reached across the table like she was going to take my hand, but I kept my hands in my lap. "Sweetheart, we love you so much, and if we've taken you for granted, we're truly sorry. But you have to understand this invoice thing. It feels like an attack. It feels like you're trying to hurt us." And there it was, the reframing I'd been expecting. Somehow, my documentation of being used had become me attacking them. "I'm not trying to hurt anyone," I said, keeping my voice steady even though my heart was racing. "I'm trying to show you what my contribution actually looks like, since apparently it's invisible enough that you think I need to do more." Rachel spoke up then, her voice defensive. "But some of these things are just normal family stuff. Like, yeah, you helped with wedding planning, but that's what sisters do. You're acting like I forced you to help me." I turned to look at her directly. "Did I ever say no when you asked? Did you ever consider that maybe I wanted to say no but didn't feel like I could? And it's not about individual favors, Rachel. It's about the accumulation, the expectation, the fact that my time and energy are treated as unlimited resources that nobody has to acknowledge or appreciate." Marcus jumped in, and I could see he was working hard to control his temper. "So what? You want us to pay you now? You want to turn our family into some kind of transactional relationship where we pay each other for basic kindness?" I laughed, and it came out harsher than I intended. "No, Marcus, I don't want payment. But I'd love for you to pay back the $2,000 you borrowed 9 months ago. And I'd love for basic kindness to go both ways. When's the last time any of you helped me with something? When's the last time you asked if I needed anything? When's the last time you even asked how I was doing beyond a superficial greeting?" The question hung in the air, and I watched them all look at each other, then away. Nobody had an answer because they couldn't remember. That's when I saw the first crack in their defensive wall. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but this time they looked different, less manipulative and more genuinely distressed. "I didn't know you felt so alone," she said quietly. "But honey, you never said anything. You always seemed so happy to help, so capable of handling everything. And that was the crux of it, wasn't it? I'd been so good at being the helper, the reliable one, the person who never complained, that they genuinely believed it cost me nothing. They'd mistaken my inability to say no for enthusiasm, my reliability for unlimited capacity. "I shouldn't have to tell you that I'm human," I said, feeling tears threatening now but refusing to let them fall. "I shouldn't have to break down or create an invoice to get you to see that I have limits, that I have needs, that I might be drowning while making it look easy." My father leaned back in his chair, and for the first time he looked old to me, tired and overwhelmed. "You're right," he said, and the simple acknowledgement nearly undid me. "You're absolutely right. We've been so used to you being there that we stopped seeing the cost. We stopped seeing you." The dinner continued, but it was different. We actually talked, really talked, in ways we hadn't in years. Rachel admitted she'd felt jealous sometimes of how capable I seemed, how together I had my life, never realizing I was falling apart inside. Marcus confessed he'd been avoiding dealing with his own problems by making me deal with them instead, that it was easier to dump on me than to face his issues. My mother talked about how she'd raised me to be helpful and self-sufficient, never realizing she'd created someone who couldn't ask for help themselves. And slowly, painstakingly, we started going through the invoice line by line. Not to dispute it, but to actually see it, to let each entry sink in. There were moments where they tried to justify or minimize things, but I pushed back, gently but firmly. May 3rd, you drove 3 hours to help me move furniture, Rachel read aloud, then paused. I remember that day. Your boyfriend was supposed to come with you and you canceled a trip you'd planned with him. You never told me that. You never asked, I said. You needed help? I said yes. And everyone assumed that meant it was no big deal for me. As they read through more entries, I watched their faces change, saw the recognition dawning that this wasn't exaggeration or keeping score. This was just truth, uncomfortable and undeniable. Marcus got quiet when he saw the loan documented, with dates and the broken promises to repay it. I'll pay you back, he said. And this time it sounded different, like he actually meant it. This week. I'm sorry. My father pointed to a cluster of entries from October, when he'd had his surgery. I called you every single day for 2 weeks, he said slowly. I never once called Marcus or Rachel, and they live closer. Because she's the reliable one, my mother said, and there was something broken in her voice. Because we trained her to always say yes, and then we punished her for getting tired. That recognition, finally hearing them say it out loud, was what I'd needed. Not an invoice payment, not even apologies necessarily, but just acknowledgement that this was real, that I wasn't crazy or selfish or dramatic. We talked for hours that night, well past when we normally would have dispersed. We talked about patterns and expectations, about the difference between asking for help and demanding it, about reciprocity and boundaries. I told them about the dates I'd canceled, the job opportunities I'd passed up because I was too exhausted from family obligations, the friendships I'd let fade because I didn't have energy left for anyone outside the family. And they listened, really listened, maybe for the first time. Rachel pulled out her phone and canceled a favor she'd been about to ask me for, deciding to hire someone instead. I can afford it, she said. I've just gotten used to you being free. That one word, free, hung in the air. Free as in no cost, but also free as in available, as in belonging to them. Marcus transferred money to my account right there at the table, the full $2,000 plus interest. And when I tried to say he didn't need to include interest, he insisted. I owe you more than money, he said. But money is a start. My parents promised to start asking my siblings to help with things, to stop defaulting to me every time. They promised to check in with me, to actually ask how I was doing and wait for a real answer. And I promised to practice saying no, to stop being silently resentful and start being vocally honest about my capacity and limits. Have you ever been through something similar with your family, where you realized you were giving so much more than you were receiving? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below, because I'm learning that this pattern is more common than I ever realized. We ended that dinner with hugs that felt different, more genuine somehow. Like we were hugging each other as we actually were, not as the roles we'd been playing. As I drove home that night, I felt lighter than I had in years, like I'd been carrying a weight I didn't even know was there until I set it down. The weeks that followed were an adjustment for everyone. There were moments where old patterns tried to reassert themselves, where someone would call asking for something and using that specific tone that implied I couldn't say no. But now, sometimes I did say no. The first time I told Rachel I couldn't babysit because I had plans with Jessica, there was this long pause on the phone, and I could tell she was about to push back, to tell me her need was more important. But then she said, "Okay, I'll call a babysitter. Have fun with Jessica." Such simple words, but they represented a seismic shift. I started reclaiming my time, my energy, my life. I took that vacation I'd been postponing for 3 years. I went on actual dates without canceling at the last minute. I took up painting, something I'd wanted to do for ages but never had time for. And something remarkable happened. My family adjusted. They learned to solve their own problems more often, to plan ahead instead of expecting last-minute rescues, to ask each other for help instead of defaulting to me. Our relationships actually got healthier. I was less resentful, they were less entitled, and we could enjoy time together without the undercurrent of unspoken expectations. Rachel's wedding happened, and it was beautiful. I was involved, but as her sister, not as her unpaid wedding planner. I gave a toast that made her cry happy tears, and later she told me she was grateful for the invoice, grateful that I'd had the courage to show her what she'd been blind to. I was becoming mom, she said, taking you for granted the same way. You stopped that pattern. Marcus paid for a family dinner and insisted I not help with any planning or cleanup. It felt weird to just show up and be served, to be treated like a guest instead of staff, but it was also wonderful. He pulled me aside and apologized again, more thoroughly this time. I've been thinking about what you said, about when we last asked how you were doing. And I realized I don't know basic things about your life because I never asked. So I'm asking now. How are you? Really? We talked for an hour, and it was the first real conversation we'd had in years where he didn't need something from me, where I was just his sister, not his solution. My parents started a new tradition of rotating who hosts Sunday dinner, and on my turn, they insisted on arriving early to help me prepare. It was strange watching my mother in my kitchen following my instructions, but it was also healing in a way I hadn't expected. My father, who'd always been somewhat emotionally distant, started calling just to chat, sending me articles he thought I'd find interesting, asking about my painting classes. The family group chat, which had always been mostly requests and logistics, became a place where we actually shared our lives. They started asking about my job, my hobbies, my feelings. I started sharing more, realizing I'd been so focused on being useful that I'd forgotten to be myself around them. But the biggest change was internal. I'd spent so much of my life defining myself through what I did for others that I'd lost sight of who I was independently. The invoice, as dramatic as it was, had forced me to see the cost of that, to recognize that being endlessly available wasn't love, it was self-erasure. I learned to sit with the discomfort of someone being disappointed in me without immediately trying to fix it. I practiced saying no without over-explaining or apologizing. I started asking for help when I needed it, which was terrifying at first but got easier with practice. And I learned that real love, real family, can survive honesty. That showing someone the impact of their actions isn't an attack. It's an invitation to do better. The invoice is still saved on my computer. I look at it sometimes, not as a weapon or a point of pride, but as a reminder that my time has value, that my energy isn't infinite, that I deserve relationships where the giving and receiving flow both ways. Sometimes people ask if I regret sending it, if I think I went too far. And honestly, no. Could I have handled it differently? Maybe. But nothing else had worked. Years of subtle hints, of hoping they'd notice, of silent resentment building up until I could barely function at family gatherings. The invoice was dramatic, sure, but it was also effective in a way that nothing else had been. It forced a conversation that was long overdue, and while it was painful and uncomfortable and sometimes ugly, it led to genuine change. My family now isn't perfect, we still have our moments and our conflicts, but it's more balanced, more real, more sustainable. I can show up for them now without depleting myself because I know they'll show up for me too. I can say no when I need to without guilt consuming me because they respect my boundaries. I can be myself, not just the helper, not just the solution, but a whole person with needs and limits and dreams that matter. And that's worth more than the $47,000 on that invoice. That's worth everything. So here's what I want you to take away from my story. Your time matters, your energy matters, you matter. Not just for what you can do for other people, but for who you are. If you're the person everyone calls when they need something, but nobody asks how you're really doing, that's not a role to be proud of. It's a problem to address. If you're giving and giving until you're empty, that's not love, that's not family, that's not sustainable. And it's okay to say stop. It's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to make visible what's been invisible, even if it makes people uncomfortable. Especially if it makes people uncomfortable. Because sometimes discomfort is the only thing that sparks change. You don't need to create an actual invoice like I did, but you do need to value yourself enough to require that others value you too. You need to believe that your contribution deserves recognition, that your effort deserves appreciation, that your presence in someone's life should be treasured, not taken for granted. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family or friendships, if you've ever been the person everyone relies on but nobody thinks to support, I want to hear from it. Drop a comment below sharing your experience, because I truly believe that speaking these truths out loud, making them visible, is how we start to change these patterns, not just in our individual families, but in our culture that teaches some of us to give endlessly while teaching others to take without thinking. Understanding your worth, setting boundaries, recognizing when you're being taken for granted. These aren't selfish acts, they're necessary survival skills, and I wish someone had told me that decades ago. But I'm telling you now, and I hope you'll take it to heart in a way I wish I had earlier. If this story touched something in you, if it made you think about your own relationships and where you might be giving too much or receiving too little, please leave a like on this video. That little gesture means the world to us here at Living Through It and helps us share these stories with more people who might need to hear them. And if you want to hear more real stories about real struggles, about the messy, complicated, beautiful work of being human and navigating relationships and finding yourself in the chaos, then subscribe to Living Through It. Hit that bell icon so you get notified every time we share a new story. Because trust me, you won't want to miss what we have coming next. We're building a community here of people who are brave enough to be honest, strong enough to be vulnerable, and smart enough to know that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stand up for yourself. I'm so grateful you took the time to listen to my story today. It wasn't easy to share, and I know it wasn't always easy to hear, but these are the conversations we need to be having. These are the truths we need to be speaking. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here, for listening, for caring enough to stick with this story all the way to the end. Remember, you're not alone in whatever you're going through, and your story matters just as much as mine does. Take care of yourself out there, set those boundaries, and never forget that you deserve relationships where you're valued, seen, and appreciated for who you are, not just what you can do. Until next time, keep living through it, because that's what we do. We survive, we adapt, we grow, and we come out stronger on the other side.